I've done 3 coats of the chrome paint, and you can see how that painting the backs rather than the fronts really gives you a nice reflective surface. So there is bulbs in there. There is actually on the real aircraft, there's a little sort of 3-pronged spiral grille on the front. But what we're going to do is just paint the bulbs black in the middle, and that'll emulate the lights quite nicely, I think. Right, so before we go any further with this, I want to give the aluminium areas a bit of a wash, just to bring out some of the detail before we start closing things up and adding more detail. I've mixed a wash, which is 3 parts of this dark brown wash by Humbrol and 1 part of this dark grey wash from Humbrol. I haven't thinned it any further than that, it's just as it comes mixed together, and that gives you a sort of a nice gloopy brown colour. You've got to remember that dirt is never black, so we'll give this a go and see what we think. So it does settle, so it's worth keeping your mixing brush available, but obviously we want to put this in with a little bit more precision, so I'm going to use a finer brush. This is my number 7 series 000 from Winsor & Newton, which is a fabulous brush. Highly recommend their brushes. So what we're basically going to do is just dip it in and run it into all the little gaps and crevices, just to make all the raised detail come to the surface a little bit more. It adds shadow, it adds texture, and should make it, well, just make it all pop out a little bit, to be honest. So I'm starting with the floor pan, which has this sort of corrugated look. So I want to bring that out. You can see how that is starting to shine through now. Actually, aluminium is one of those really nice base colours to work with weathering. So where we've got the joins in the framework, we'll run a little bit in just to highlight them. So completed the wash. You can see that brings the detail out a little bit more, and just adds a slightly used look to it. You can see there in the gun bay, it's just bringing the detail out. We've also gone and done it in the gear bay as well. I've also put the lights on, so I've got to paint the black in the middle. So the ammunition boxes have been also given a wash, so they look suitably grimy. So what we're going to do next with these is, in those little recesses, is paint a little bit of brass in there to simulate the ammunition. Now with the guns, I have actually given them a wash in our dirty wash, the same that we've used for the inside of the cockpit there. But what I want to do is to add a little extra to the gun. So what we're going to do is just rub them over with a pencil, and that's just got, what that basically does is it metallizes the raised surfaces and makes them look a little bit used and worn. Because one way or another these were probably handled fairly regularly. There's no particular science to this, you're just rubbing over the graphite so that it catches the edges. And you're not particularly looking for it to be tidy and uniform, so don't worry about that. Not sure if that shows up on camera, but we'll take some photographs when they're installed, and hopefully that will show up a little bit then. So the guns are ready to be installed. Now when I dry fitted these, they were a little bit tricky. And they are slightly different, so you have to make sure you've got the right one, otherwise it won't fit right. So you have some that sit forward, and then some that sit back. So that's the first one sits back. You see this one's now a shorter one. Okay, and then we have two bulkheads that we fit in after, according to the instructions. So that could be interesting. But they need painting in the aluminium yet, so that'll be amongst the next things we do. Now, whilst the glue's drying on that lot, we can have a look at attaching the seat harnesses. So the harnesses made up of 4 individual parts that are already pre-coloured, so we just have to bend them into place and install them. And we're going to start with this Y-shaped one. They look really good actually. I'm not a big fan of the pre-coloured photo etch usually, but these don't look bad. Can be a bit grainy in terms of texture. Okay, so the first one loops over the back of the seat, so we've got a little fold to put on. So basically with the pliers, the tweezers, sorry, just basically going to roll the top over. Let's just hang that on and see how that looks. And the trick is to glue it in place. And then shape it a bit up. There we go. I think pressing that in is going to help. So we'll start by putting a bit of glue where this hangs on the seat. So you can see it's hanging on, but by no means in the right shape. So we'll let the glue cure on that, and then we'll bend that down. Whilst that is drying, we can get the next part out. So we'll do a couple of harnesses which will give that good time to dry before we put the etch on that goes over the top of that. So I think we'll do number 3 next, which is the one that goes over the lever. Same process. So that hangs over the chair. Like so. And then that should fold up like that. So that's my pre-bend. This little bit that hangs off, whatever that is in the way, so I'm just going to fold it up for now. So let's get a bit of glue on that, and then we can fold that into shape as well. And there we have the harnesses in place. I think they really add a little something to all that aluminium. A little bit of colour is definitely what's needed. And I've got a little bit too much glue on the seat, so because it's PVA, it'll come off easy enough. I'm using one of these Tamiya Q-tips to remove it. I don't use these very often because they're really quite expensive for what they are, but every now and then they are quite handy. So even though this supposedly dries clear, you still need to make sure that you're not getting too much glue everywhere, because it will dry shiny. Okay, 2 straps in. We're getting there slowly. So what I'm finding is this just is not strong enough to hold this etch in place. The spring in it, I mean, I've not annealed it obviously because it's pre-painted, but the spring in it means it's popping back, so we need something a little bit stronger. So I'm going to my more familiar CA glue option. So just a little bit of medium. I'm going to start with that first one we put on and see if we can get that to sit on the seat properly as we'd like it to. There we go, that is much better. Okay, that's that in. And we're going to do the other lower seat harness. Okay, that is sitting nicely now. So, and we're getting no pop back. So we've just got this last piece to attach. So I've pre-shaped this last one just by pushing it where I want it and folding it the way I want, so hopefully it'll just glue nicely into place. There's a little bracket that goes in this recess on the kit part. So we're just going to glue it in at the top instead this time, rather than trying to be clever and glue straps at the same time. So if we let that glue in the right place, we can then just bend the straps down. So give that a sec. I have paint drying on these two frames that need to fit into the gun bay there. So while that's drying, we can test fit the wings, the upper wings I should say. So on this side where the gun bay is, as I put these together, and there is little location points on the front edge of the wings. So if I just hold those together, all the panel lines seem to be nicely lined up. There is ever so slight misalignment at the front. Tiny. I can see it but not really feel it. And it lines up perfectly at the back. So I'm happy with that. On this wing, what I found was that once you clicked into the location lugs, this one was slightly off by 1/4 millimetre maybe, ever so slightly. So what I've done is actually removed and sanded off the two location pins. So that way I can line up the panel lines on the top and bottom halves of the wings, which gets me a nice perfect alignment. And then once you've got them aligned at the wingtip end, everything else just falls together. So a little bit of pegging, clamping it together, but should be all okay. So after we put the wings together, we're next on the fuselage halves. So let's build up the dials. So we have 4 pieces involved with dials. So we should be alright with this. There's no pressure on these parts particularly. built up and ready for installation. So with that done, let's have a look at gluing these wings together. Okay, we are going to do some gluing now of these wings, and okay, so I'm going to start with the tip and align that, but I need it to be aligned the full length end before I put glue on. Okay. The most problematic part is this part here. Naturally doesn't want to be held together. So I'm just going to test how I hold that together. It's leaving an ever so slight gap. You can't get anything quite on that slope, but the bulldog clips are holding nicely. So whilst we've got it in the right place, let's start that. our first wing on. Right, just unpegged this first wing half and then remembered that we've not finished painting the lamps. So I've painted this first one in. So we're just going around the rim of the lamp and the centre bulb in black. Now there is a little grating that goes over that in reality, which we've not got. So it's okay to paint the middle black because the centre of that grating is also black. And what I'm doing is I'm just using this Humbrol 85, which is the satin black that we've used throughout so far. And I'm not thinning it because on these sort of delicate jobs, having the paint a bit thicker just gives you a little bit more control, I find. I'm using a 000 brush here. There we go. Time to put these two struts in. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue down first. So rather than putting it on the part, we'll put it on the mating surface. Right, it's important we get the right one in here. So this one goes in, rotate it the way they've got it. This one goes in on that side. That's now two struts in, so now we can test fit this. And that looks suitably busy in there now. Happy with that, gotta say that looks good. Right then, let's leave that to dry for a sec, and whilst we do that, I'm going to get the two fuselage out and cleaned up. Wings are now attached. We do need to do a little bit of fettling with them, but we want to get the fuselage halves sorted first. So you'll see that I've got some Mistress Surfacer in there. That's my second layer of Mr. Surfacer in there, and we're not far off. And I've done a first layer on the outside. We will need a little bit more on there, but what I can do while the Mr. Surfacer is drying is paint the cockpit green in this section here, and Actually, there should be a little bit on that cockpit interior we've built up. So this little panel here, the bottom of my brush handle there, that should also be green. So I hadn't missed that on the instructions. I just felt I could probably get in and do it with a fine brush afterwards. So I'm using enamel paint for this because I've got the right colour in the enamel paint, and as you can see, this is donkey's years old. But Humbrol enamels just keep going. They're great paints. Still the benchmark that you measure other paints against for me. So because I've not used it for quite a long time, I'm just getting in with a cocktail stick and giving it a loosen up first. Yeah, we can see that's quite thick and gloopy. So I'm not going to put my paint mixer in, just because I don't need a lot of paint. And you can see that even with just giving it a bit of a quick stir, we've got quite an even cover. So I'm simply going to put a small amount in there, and then we'll thin it with a enamel thinner. And get it where we want it to be. There we go, that's a really nice consistency now. So on the cockpit, on the inside of the cockpit, we can slap that on with a fairly thick brush. You'll notice I'm not using any primer. It's not really necessary with enamel paints. Now I will do 2 coats just for good colour saturation. But as you can see, we haven't got this so thin that it's translucent. Obviously your drying time of enamel is a lot longer than acrylic. Okay, so just leave that to dry for a minute. I'll clean my brush. I like to get the enamel paint off my brush as quickly as I can before it starts drying at the bezel end. And as we use this brush for mixing, we know that the paint travelled all the way up the bristles. Right. So next job is to have a look at getting some paint down where we need it there. So I need a much finer brush for that. So I'm going to use my Winsor & Newton number 7, series 7, which is a fine sable. It's such a good brush. They're really expensive, but they're worth every penny. Outlasted all my other brushes by a considerable margin. Okay. there. Happy with that. Okay, so we'll just let that dry off, and then we're ready to crack on a little bit. So here's a little tip if you've used enamel paint. Once you've got the lid on, just turn your tin upside down, and what that will do is it'll put paint all the way around the top and seal it. So if like me, you have a lid that's not fitting quite as it should do because dry paint's built up, then that's a good way of sealing it, making it airtight, and ensuring that your paint lasts a long time. I couldn't tell you how long I've had this, but it cost me £1 from Hobbycraft, so it was certainly a little while ago. Right, as the glue is drying on the wings, we are laying down our base colours on the inside of the fuselage. Having sanded back the Mr. Surfacer that we'd put in, and you can see there's no real evidence of that now, so that's all good. So we've got first coats of the aluminium just drying there, and whilst that's drying, I want to get this get all the dials mounted on the plastic part. Now, the Eduard instructions would have you sanding all of this flush before you add your photo etch part onto it. I find it easier just to simply turn it over and use the flat rear of the panel. The dials being on is not going to foul the fit of the part into the kit, so just saves a load of work, to be honest. So we will use our ultra glue, which isn't really ultra glue, it's just PVA that's thick, for mounting this, just because it's quick and it's easy, and now I've got it and need to use it. Now when you've got a part like this etch part that is different size to the plastic part, I always align it with something that's key, and in this instance it's the little cutout at the top that's going to be the key part, because that's where we're going to be putting the little heads-up display item will go in there. So aligning it with that rather than aligning it with the bottom makes more sense. So that is the dashboard done, and that can now be fitted as well ahead of a second coat of aluminium and a little bit of weathering before we bring the two halves together. So let's get the dial array into the fuselage half here. So I'm actually going to apply the glue to the space where this goes, which allows me to, rather than having to hold it into place while we glue, it allows me to just position it. As we're getting into winter and my temperatures are coming down, I can do that without the glue flashing off, so that's handy. Okay, starting to look a bit like an aeroplane. Two small parts of photo etch to add onto this sidewall here. We also have our first decal to go on as we are fitting out the cockpit. Now, this particular decal just looks the same whichever way round you have it. So, assuming that it says something, I can't see because my glasses aren't strong enough. I'm ensuring I've got it the right way around. Now, where Airfix asks us to put it, we have an indentation under it, so I'll just carefully place it. And then we'll give it a dab of microsol. That should settle that nicely. The instructions are asking us to paint some of these details that stand out in their satin 85 black that we've used in some of the other parts of the build so far. I'm not going to use that because as a satin it's closer to a gloss than a matte. And because we've put pre-coloured photo etch parts in, which aren't that shiny, I want to sort of be almost at the same place, if that makes sense, in terms of sheen. So I'm actually using Model Air Black, which is just that bit duller, but not matte. And then hopefully we're not too far away is sort of the idea. The great thing about the Model Air colours is we can pretty much paint with them straight from the bottle. They're great brush paints. Right, let's see how that dries. Our last task before we bring these two fuselage halves together is to just give them a little bit of a wash and make them look like they're not brand new. So I'm going to use Tamiya's panel line accent colour brown for that, which will be darker than what we did in the rest of the cockpit, so should contrast quite nicely, I would think. And as always with these brushes are a bit too big, so we're just going to put some in a palette. That should be more than enough. I always tend to over egg it, and then we can pin wash this with a smaller brush. We're just going to bring the detail out. We're not We're not trying to make it look over grimy particularly.